What's going on, guys? We are back here with another episode of Watching the Meta, the weekly series where we take a look at the people who are playing the Magic Online challenges of Modern, Pioneer, and Standard. We take a look and see what they decided to play this weekend, how the metagame shaped out. We're going to compare the metagame to last week's metagame for each of the three formats. And then at the very end of each format, we are going to take a look through the top 32 and see if we can find some spicy deck lists. Before we get started, I just want to say if I sound a little under the weather today, that's because I am. Got a little stuffy nose. It's just the beginning of the cold weather. It's New England. I should be used to it by now, but we'll get through it. That's all I wanted to say. But we are going to get started as we always do with Modern. And Modern is Jeskai Blink, huh? Really? 21.4% of the top 32 metagame for Jeskai Blink across these 7 challenges, which is pretty absurd. Last week it was only 5.5%. Now, certainly this has to do with some recency bias. It did just win the regional championship in Houston. I believe Vinny went on just an unbelievable tear. He lost one match the entire weekend. So I think people are sort of gravitating towards that because recent success, it just won a tournament and there's a lot of copy pasting on Magic Online. So I don't necessarily think this is going to be the case moving forward. I think this was just definitely an outlier weekend. I mean, there was one of the challenges that had 10 Jeskai Blink decks in the top 32. So I would not expect to see this moving forward. I think we'll go back to a more normal sort of distribution among these decks. But the one thing I want to highlight, Boros Energy, look at that, 11.7%, 5.4% Boros Energy. I'm going to be honest with you, I can't remember the last time Boros Energy was single digits. It might be like before Modern Horizons 3 released, which would have been before the deck even became a thing. It's crazy to see. It was actually, no, what is it? So Jeskai Blink first, 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth most played deck. Actually, sixth if you count Ruby Storm over there. Is it Prowess down a little bit from 10.9 to 8.5. Domain Zoo, Affinity, I mean, there's some small changes there, nothing too crazy. Same thing with Amulet. Ruby Storm, 2.3 to 5.8, pretty significant uptick there. But other than that, outside of the Jeskai Blink and Ruby Storm Boros Energy, everything else, there's some small changes here and there, but nothing crazy. Again, there's no way that Jeskai Blink is going to remain at 21.4%. It's a good deck, I will agree with that, but I don't think it is a fifth of the format good, if that makes any sense. So that's what the metagame looks like, and now that we've got that out of the way, let's see if we can find some spicy deck lists. And we are going to go ahead and kick things off with a second place finish here from Celestial. So what we see here is sort of a rebirth of the 4-color Omnath archetype. People who have been playing Magic or Standard/Modern since the printing of this card, you guys know how completely game warping and format warping this card was. And for a time in Modern, it was one of the best decks as well, back when we had Yorion and Up the Beanstalk and things like that. It has sort of calmed down as of late. There really hasn't been a ton of people putting up results, but Celestial here is carrying the torch for you 4-color gamers out there. Now, the cards in this deck list, you see stuff like Solitude and Teferi Time Raveler, Renin 6, removal spells. A lot of that stuff is the same. But there are 4 copies of Orim's Chant. Now, if you take a look, there's no Isochron Scepters. So Celestial is just playing Orim's Chant for, I guess, value? In terms of, it's just a powerful card to stop your opponent. It really can feel like a Time Walk at times, where you upkeep Chant with Kicker them, especially if you have a Teferi in play, so they can't even respond with other spells. And then they can't do anything on your turn because you have the Teferi in play. So it can act like a Time Walk at some points. And then once you start getting into loops with Eternal Witness and Ephemerate, you can actually just infinitely chant your opponent. Because you can Ephemerate the Witness to get back the chant them on their upkeep, rebound the Ephemerate, target the Witness, get back the Ephemerate, Ephemerate the Witness, get back chant, you see, etc., etc. This deck is also playing a ton of card advantage, 4 Stock Up and 4 Quantum Riddler. Riddler, notably a very, very powerful 5-mana card that you can cast with Omnath mana after a fetch land. So yeah, two Wrath of the Skies main deck. Again, some other kill spells. Take a look at the sideboard here. Very, very targeted sideboard, I guess I would say that's the word I would use. But yeah, interesting looking take on the 4-color Omnath deck list for you 4-color gamers out there. And we're not going to spend too much time on this, but one thing I did want to mention, Karn with Pants. Karn with Pants. More importantly, this is an Eldrazi Tron deck list. From flossing in 8th place here, so did top 8 a challenge, that has not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 copies of Soul Talisman. So this is an artifact that you can't even cast. You have to suspend it. It's similar to like the Crashing Footfalls, Living End, Lotus Bloom cycle of cards, where for 1 mana, you suspend it with 3 time counters, and then when it comes, you can cast it for free, and then it's an artifact that adds 2 mana. It's just a Soul Ring. So I don't necessarily know if this is the card you want to be playing, but maybe it's worth trying because you suspend it on turn 1, and then it seems good in the games where you don't have access to Tron, where you just get this extra boost of 2 mana, which helps you cast stuff like Ugin and Karn the Great Creator, Karn Liberated, maybe a Devourer, for the games where you don't already have Tron set up. So I don't know. Maybe it's better than I think it is, but I'm going to hold my judgment out on this one. Oh, baby, do I love me a good Skelemental deck. Dragon Fodder in 28th place here. Lightning Skelemental. People have tried Skelemental decks ever since the printing of this card in the very first Modern Horizons set, so for the past 5 years at this point. It never has really gotten to the point where it is a tier 1 threat, but this deck list has gotten a couple of cards with some recent printings, right? The unbanning of Faithless Looting certainly has caused a little bit of a resurgence in this deck list, where you can Faithless Looting the Skelemental into your graveyard and then just unearth it on turn 2 to get a nice 6-piece in, make them discard 2 cards. You also have some ways to take advantage of the Skelemental because it leaves the battlefield at end of turn, but if you can use it before the end step with, say, a Flare of Malice or a Corrupted Conviction to draw some cards, or even a Village Rites, then you can get some value out of the Skelemental before it has to go away. Also, you have Thunderkin Awakener, which can return the Skelemental from your graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking, so you can basically do it every single turn. I mean, that's pretty much it in terms of, like, cards that synergize with the Skelemental. You have Supplier, which can mill the Skelemental, and then you can also sacrifice the Supplier to the Conviction or Flare of Malice to go a little bit deeper, trying to find the Skelemental, which you can then unearth. As a black-red deck, you get a bunch of removal spells. This person is trying out 2 copies of Firebrain Scheme, which you can exile the top 2, choose 1. It's like a red cantrip. It's a little strange because if you exile Skelemental, you do have to pay the full cost for it, but it is nice because it says until the end of your next turn. So if you Firebrain Scheme on turn 2, hit a Skelemental, you can just play your 3rd land next turn, cast it then, and not have to worry about casting it in the same turn, which is kind of cool. So that's the Skelemental deck against some Wrench Mines in the sideboard. Ooh, that's kind of sick. Yeah, I love me some Skelemental. Not sure if this deck is good, but it certainly looks sweet. And the last deck list I want to show you here is from user 4L3. This is Mono Black Eldrazi. Now, I've seen this deck floating around over the past, I want to say 4 or 5 months at this point. It's been a while. I think it was Selfie Sec who started playing this one. I think it was originally a Spike deck. Selfie started playing it, then now it's been kind of making the rounds a little bit. But basically the concept here is you are utilizing Eldrazi Temple as kind of your big mana engine here to enable stuff like Kozilek's Command and Thought-Knot Seer. We're not going all the way up the curve to stuff like Devourer of Destiny and Emrakul. It really is just the K commands and the Thought-Knot Seers. But the rest of this deck is just good black mid-range cards where you have Thoughtseize and Fatal Push, some of the best interaction of all time. You have Emperor Bones and Nethergoyf, some of the very, very powerful threats from the Modern Horizons era. Orcish Bowmasters, get some Graveyard Trespasser for Graveyard Hate. And speaking of Graveyard Hate, this deck also happens to be an Urza's Saga deck, where you can get stuff like Shadow Spear, Pithing Needle, or Nihil Spellbomb. The Mishra's Baubles look kind of weird because there's no like channelers or anything like that, but Mishra's Bauble helps fuel Nethergoyf. And when you have Urza's Saga alongside K-Command and Mishra's Bauble, Nethergoyf gets pretty big pretty quickly. Even though you're a mono black deck, you can still set up the top and do some like bobble fetch shenanigans with Prismatic Vista. So really interesting take on kind of the black mid-range archetype. We don't really have like a true Thoughtseize Fatal Push deck in Modern right now, but for all you Jund lovers out there, I guess I would call this Zoomer Jund, dare I say it? All right, with Modern out of the way, let us go ahead and switch over to Pioneer. Orzhov Monument, huh? I feel like I'm getting some deja vu from looking at the Modern metagame snapshot with the Jeskai Blank deck. Orzhov Monument, 7.5% last week, 17.5% this week, huh? So big jump here with the Orzhov Monument deck. It did win 2 challenges, and it's certainly, again, it's the same thing where, with it's so hard to parse Magic Online data sometimes, because you do frequently find you find these situations where a deck wins a challenge, and even like, especially if it's a deck that nobody had seen before, the very next challenge you'll see 10 in the top 32 and they're all the same 75. So there is definitely a lot of copy pasting, especially with formats like Pioneer that maybe get a little bit less attention and people are maybe not paying as much attention to it. That makes it more likely for people to copy paste in a format like Pioneer. Mono Red Mice down a little bit. Phoenix, basically the same. Azorius Control, about the same. Demons, about the same. So it is kind of strange to see basically all of the top decks, sans Mono Red for about a 4% change, about the same, but then this huge increase in Monument, because that means that the increase in Monument is being taken a lot from the other category, rather than some of the top players switching to the Monument deck, which is definitely something worth noting. Scapeshift up to 5% from, it looks like, mostly non-existent last week. 5-Color Legends, about the same thing, up nothing from 3 to 3.1%. No really other notable changes here. But yeah, Orzhov Monument, 17.5%. We're not going to look at the Monument deck, but it's Orzhov with like Greasefang, Parhelion, Monument 2 Endurance, and then the 8-pack of the 2-mana, 3-power, discard a card, indestructible creatures. That's that kind of stuff. So, that's Pioneer. That's what the metagame looks like. But we're going to go ahead and see if we can find some spicy deck lists. Some people just can't put the loot tree down. Genkaman 2 in 3rd place here. You might ask yourself, why is every single card in this particular deck list a one of? And if for people who were not around during the Ikoria era, you may not be familiar with the companion mechanic and how most of them are banned in most competitive formats, but one of them that is still legal is Lutri the Spell Chaser. Its companion requirement means that each non-land card in your starting deck has a different name. So there are people who still believe in the powerful Otter, so this is a blue-white control deck, and it turns out that a lot of the cards in the blue-white control deck are pretty interchangeable, where most people play 4 Consult the Star charts, but if you replace the rest of your Consult the Star charts with, I don't know, a Memory Deluge and a Stock Up and some other card advantage card that I'm sure that is here that I can't see, a Treasure Cruise, a Dig Through Time. Same thing with the Wraths, too. Some people play 4 Supreme Verdicts. Here we have, what do we have? A Settle the Wreckage, a Supreme Verdict, a Farewell. I think there was, no, there's none of the 3-mana sweepers, but you get the idea. And there's enough counter spells where you can, mix and match your counter spells, and it's really not that big of a difference. So that is definitely a different take on blue-white control. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend this, but if you're into the companion sort of thing, I guess you could do worse. And no Lotries in this deck, but Harry 13 here in 10th place. This is actually pretty funny because initially I saw this deck list from a Twitter post, and I believe it was from a Japanese tournament. And I was going to feature that deck anyways, because I assumed that, I didn't think that I would see a list of it in the top 32s of the challenges. I think Harry may have changed a couple of cards, but if you guys remember, if it was last week or the week before, we shouted out a Caleb D deck, and Caleb D won an RCQ with blue-black midrange with Quantum Riddler and Splash Portal. Now, you do have a pretty significant upgrade from Splash Portal in Pioneer in the form of Essence Flux, because this is an instant, and it being an instant is a lot more important when you're trying to use it as either a combat trick or a counter spell for removal spells. But basically the concept here is you warp the Riddler, pay 1 mana, flicker the Riddler with Essence Flux, and then now you get to keep a Riddler in play. And the nice thing about porting this deck over to Pioneer is you also get a lot more cheap interaction. You get stuff like Thoughtseize and Fatal Push, which allows you to empty your hand a little bit faster to get you to a position where you can have 1 or 0 cards in hand so you can draw extra cards with Riddler. Also, one thing I want to highlight here, the 1 mana spells, very good with Shredder, right? Shredder, very powerful when you're looting and casting 2 spells and conniving. Conniving gets kind of out of control with Riddler, where if you cast your second spell for the turn and you have 1 card left in hand, you draw 2 and discard 1. So every time you trigger Connive, that could be an extra card with Riddler, which gets pretty out of control pretty quickly. 3 Shieldreds, because if you're drawing extra cards with Riddler, Shieldred is very powerful. Some more kill spells, just Spyglass Siren, which looks out of place, especially in Pioneer, but if you're playing Kaido, you need some 1-drops to enable that, and Siren is probably the best one to do that. So yeah, in terms of mid-range, Pioneer is not short on mid-range decks. There's Mono Black, there's Rakdos, and I gotta say, Dimir might actually be the new best mid-range deck. All right, so I didn't have a ton for you for Pioneer this week, and this deck list is Boros Convoke, which, you know, most of this deck list you've probably seen before if you've seen a Boros Convoke deck. The one thing that I wanted to highlight here is it seems like Boros Convoke players are potentially starting to adapt Cori-steel Cutter. And I think this makes a lot of sense because part of the weakness of the Boros Convoke deck is decks that have a lot of sweepers, right? Blue-white control can play a bunch of verdicts and settle the wreckages, things like that. And Cori-steel Cutter, to an extent, can help you fight through some of those sweepers sometimes. Now, it's possible that maybe you want to play this as a sideboard card because in a lot of Game 1 situations, you kind of just maybe don't have time for Cutter, or you'd rather be doing other stuff like Knight Errant or Luxodon. But in very specific matchups, I could see the Cutter being very, very good. So I do think it makes a lot of sense to at least play them in the sideboard. There's a couple of voices here too, which kind of accomplish a similar thing. They can be sort of an army in a can against very, very heavy sweeper decks. So nothing too fancy here, but I just wanted to highlight the addition of Cutter into this deck because I think it makes a lot of sense. And that's all I got for Pioneer today, folks. Let us talk about everybody's favorite format, Standard. Is it November 10th yet? So normally I've had this bit going for the past couple of weeks where I just say, this is Standard, let's look at some decks. And, you know, I was going to do that, but I just wanted to mention before, I'm not really going to talk about this metagame because it doesn't really matter at this point. We're all just kind of in the November 10th waiting room. The one thing I just wanted to mention, there was a Spotlight Series in Baltimore that happened this past weekend. 31% of the day 1 metagame, VV Cauldron, which to be honest with you, is a lot less than I thought it was going to be. I thought it would eclipse 50. The day 2 metagame was 52%. So, and I think it had a 38% conversion rate. So not only was it more than half of the day 2 meta, it also had the best conversion rate, and it also had the best win rate. And it also put 21 copies in the top 32. Okay, let's look at some deck lists. Enough talk about VV Cauldron. Let's talk about some sweet deck lists here. And the first one I have for you here from DellDeck_89 in 13th place. A deck list with a card that is near and dear to my heart, Zoetic Glyph. I am in love with this card. I played a lot of Zoetic Glyph when Foundations came out because I paired it with Leyline Axe, which was pretty cool, and there was a lot of interesting things going on there, but it turns out there's actually a couple of recent printings that potentially maybe make Zoetic Glyph as something that we want to look at again, notably Nutrient Block. So this is a 1-mana artifact. It's a food. More importantly, it's indestructible. It says effects that say destroy, don't destroy this artifact. And then you can sack the food to gain 3 life, and then when it dies, you draw a card. The important line of text on this card is indestructible. So if you Zoetic Glyph your Nutrient Block, you now have paid 3 mana for a 5/4 that is indestructible. And what's also really nice about this is you can actually search up the nutrient block with Tezzeret and then play the Zoetic Glyph on the nutrient block. Tezzeret can also search up removal. It can search up graveyard hate. So, you know, between Tezzeret and nutrient block, a couple of recent additions to this deck list, I may have to give this one a try again because this deck looks awesome. I'm not sure about only playing 2 Warden, because Warden does seem like one of your more powerful cards when you're playing 4 Siren, 4 Inspector. Planisphere is interesting too, because this deck does have a lot of non-creature spells. And Planisphere, more importantly, has 2 bodies, where it's an artifact and a creature, so it counts as 2 bodies for Warden, things like that. You can also use the Planisphere to put counters on the token, and then equip the Planisphere with Glyph. So then maybe you have like a 3/3 Planisphere and a 5/4 with the Glyph. Case of the Filched Falcon, another payoff for having a bunch of artifacts in play. Just a really cool looking deck list here from Dell Deck. And again, I don't plan on playing any standard until November 10th, but boy, let me tell you, I have a giant list of decks that I'm ready to try once November 10th comes, and this is a new addition to that list. All right, so next up here we have a 31st place finish from Mr. Right Meow. Now, you take a look at this deck list and you see Kona, and you see Lost in the Maze, and you see some big creatures, and you might think to yourself, well, this is just another Omniscience deck. Kind of, but let's talk about it. So really, this is kind of, I guess I would describe this as a manifest deck, where you have cards that pay you off for manifesting. So Oblivious Bookworm, 2 mana, 2/3. Says, end step, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card unless a permanent entered the battlefield face down or you turn to permanent face up. So if you every turn you have this in play and you manifest, you're up a card. That's the idea. Hauntwood Shrieker, whenever it attacks, you manifest Dread, and then you can actually pay 2 to essentially flip a creature that is face down, face up. So if you hit the jackpot and hit one of your large creatures as a manifest, which this deck has a pretty good amount of them. It's what, 3, 6, 9, 11, 13? So almost a quarter of your deck is good hits for the Hauntwood Shrieker if you count the Overlords. That's kind of cool. This deck does have a Kona plan B, I guess as it were, where you have Kona. If you don't manifest your large creature, you can use Kona to put them into play tapped. And then a couple of other cards here. Hide in Plain Sight. This is a 4 mana sorcery. Look at the top 5, cloak 2 of them, and then put the rest in the bottom. So it's like a Coco-esque style thing. But again, you get to look at 5 cards, try and find a big creature, and then you can cheat that into play with Hauntwood Shrieker. So a lot of weird stuff going on in this deck list. It's like, I guess I would describe it as Omniscience with extra steps, and probably worse than Omniscience, but, you know, at least this deck has the cool factor. Now, I mentioned there were 21 copies in the top 32, 21 copies of VV in the top 32 of Baltimore. One of those non-VV decks in the top 32 was user Rookie in 26th place. I believe finished with an X4 record, so pretty respectable record over the course of 15 rounds. And this is the blue-white enchantments deck, which we've seen some of in the past with stuff like Ethereal Armor, buffing your creature for each enchantment you control and giving it first strike. You have a lot of enchantments that either draw cards in the form of Faithlight or Prophetic Memory, protect your creature in the form of Shard Mage's Rescue, kill your opponent's creatures, or is a creature itself, where you can just use Origin of Spider-Man to, I forget what the name of the multiversal, because I copied this deck list, I just mentioned this, I copied this deck list from Melee instead of mtgo.com like I usually do, so it actually pulled up the real name, so keep that in mind. But yeah, the fact that this is an enchantment and also a creature means that it pairs very nicely with Scavenger and any of your enchantments that, or any of your payoffs for having enchantments, like Entity Tracker and things like that. Hull Creeper, which is unblockable, where you can imagine Ethereal Armor on that thing goes out of control. Prophetic Memory, because you're drawing extra cards with Tracker, you can kind of go off with Profs in that way. So yeah, I mean, we've seen decks like this in the past, but yeah, this is the first kind of big performance from this deck list since the addition of Through the Omen Paths, aka Legally Distinct Spider-Man. So cool looking list from Rookie, and I may have to give this one a shot myself. And last but not least, X-File here in 32nd place. Now, I've seen a couple of different people try some different shells with inevitable defeat, because initially what happened is there was people who were playing Jeskai control. And the Jeskai control players, they kept losing to Cauldron, VV decks, and things like that, and they wanted to find a more versatile answer. So they just said, screw it, we'll splash black for inevitable defeat, which the 4-color deck has been doing well over the past couple of months. But more people are realizing that inevitable defeat is one of the better removal spells in the format because of its unconditionalness. Is that a word? I don't know. But the fact that it kills anything is very, very important. So there's definitely some potential for other shells, and that's what X-File's done here. Sort of like a more aggressive approach to a Mardu mid-range deck, where you have 1-drops in the form of Cecil, powerful 2-drops like Confidant and Sunset Saboteur, powerful 3s like Preacher and Nemesis, and then just a pile of good removal. Helix, Shoot the Sheriff, Inevitable Defeat. And the important part about playing Helix and Defeat is that you have a lot of reach. And not only do you have a lot of reach, you have the haste creatures with Nemesis, you have the evasion with Saboteur. So really cool looking deck list here, and I wonder if there's maybe some more ways to approach this. Like maybe you can even make it more aggressive, where you don't play the Acolytes, you play some more 1-drops like Burnout Bastronaut, and you just like keep going lower on the, like low to the ground as possible, which I think is kind of cool and potentially has some merit there. So some things to think about. Again, probably not going to be relevant until November 10th, but at least we have some things to think about until then. Well, my friends, that is going to do it for another episode of Watching the Meta. I thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. Let me know in the comment section down below what was your favorite deck list here from today's video. And can't wait till November 10th. So I'll see you guys next week. Thank you all for tuning in. And until next time, adios.